Let me paint you a picture that you probably recognize. It is late evening. You are surrounded by the evidence of connection, a phone with notifications, a social media feed full of people living full lives, a contact list with hundreds of names. Somewhere in the city around you, millions of people are going about their evenings. You are, by any objective measure, thoroughly embedded in a web of human proximity, and you feel utterly, profoundly, inexplicably alone. Not lonely in the simple sense of wishing for company. Something deeper than that. A specific hollow quality of disconnection that the presence of other people does not address, and that more social interaction does not resolve. The kind of loneliness that persists through crowded rooms and busy days and long conversations. The kind that follows you home from the party and sits with you in the silence after the screen goes dark. We live in the most connected era in the entire history of human civilization. The technology for reaching another human being has never been more sophisticated, more immediate, more thoroughly integrated into the fabric of daily life. 8 billion people share this planet. Billions of them are, at this very moment, online, available, potentially reachable within seconds, and the feeling of belonging to nothing has become the defining psychological experience of the age. How is this possible? How does the most connected generation in human history produce, simultaneously, an epidemic of the specific interior experience of disconnection? How does the unprecedented abundance of social contact fail to address the very thing that social contact was supposed to provide? Carl Jung had an answer to this question, and it is, like most of his genuinely important insights, simultaneously deeply uncomfortable and profoundly liberating. It challenges the assumption that most people never think to question the assumption that loneliness is primarily about the absence of other people, and that its remedy is therefore primarily about adding more of them. It is not, and it never was. True loneliness, in Jung's understanding, is not the absence of people. It is a severance from something far older, far deeper, and far more fundamental than any individual human relationship. It is the disconnection from what he called the collective unconscious, the vast, shared, psychic inheritance of the entire human species that lives beneath the personal mind of every individual who has ever drawn breath. And the cure for the epidemic of our time, the specific, pervasive, modern variety of loneliness that no amount of social technology has been able to address, is not found in more connection in the conventional sense. It is found in the return to a depth of connection that most people in the contemporary world have forgotten was possible. Today, we explore what that means, what the collective unconscious actually is, why modernity has severed us from it, what loneliness is actually signaling, how the archetypes reconnect us to the human family, and what the practical path back to genuine belonging actually looks like in a world that seems specifically designed to prevent it. 1. The invisible web. Understanding the collective unconscious. There is an assumption so deeply embedded in the modern understanding of mind and self that most people never notice it operating. It is the assumption that your inner life is entirely your own, that the thoughts you think, the images that arise in your dreams, the fears and desires and impulses that move through you, these are yours in the most private and individual sense, generated by your personal history, confined to the boundaries of your personal skull. Carl Jung spent his career demonstrating, with a depth and rigor that his contemporaries found both compelling and disturbing, that this assumption is not quite accurate. Beneath the personal unconscious, the layer of the mind that contains your individual memories, your personal repressions, the specifically biographical contents of your own psychological history, Jung identified something deeper and considerably more surprising, a layer of the psyche that is not personal at all, not yours in the biographical sense, not derived from your individual experience. He called it the collective unconscious, and he described it as the psychic inheritance of the human species, the accumulated, encoded, biologically transmitted residue of everything that human beings have experienced, feared, desired, worshipped, and made meaning from across the entirety of our existence as a species. The contents of the collective unconscious are not memories in the ordinary sense. They are structural patterns, recurring forms of experience, universal figures and situations, fundamental emotional and psychological dynamics that appear across all cultures, all historical periods, all geographical locations, with a consistency that individual experience cannot account for. Think of the image that Jung used himself. Walk through a forest and look at the trees. Each one appears separate, distinct, individual, rising from its own specific point in the ground. growing in its own specific direction, presenting its own specific configuration of branches and leaves and bark. The visible part of each tree is genuinely individual, but below the surface, the roots are intertwined. They share the same earth. They participate, through the chemistry of soil and fungal networks, in a continuous exchange of nutrients and information that makes the apparent separateness of the individual trees somewhat misleading. Each tree is individual and simultaneously part of something much larger than itself. This is the relationship between the individual human mind and the collective unconscious. Each of us is individual, genuinely distinct, uniquely configured by the specific combination of biology and biography that constitutes our personal history. But beneath the individual configuration, the roots are shared. The deep structures of the psyche, the fundamental patterns of fear and desire, the universal figures that populate the mythologies and religions and dreams of every human culture, these are not individual possessions. They are the common inheritance of the species. When you feel a pull toward a particular story or symbol that you cannot fully explain, through your personal history, when a dream image carries a weight that seems disproportionate to anything in your waking life, when you encounter a myth from a culture entirely foreign to your own and feel, inexplicably, that it is somehow familiar, you are touching the collective unconscious. You are registering the resonance between your individual mind and the vast, ancient, shared bedrock of human psychological experience that underlies it. And this recognition that your depths are not only yours, that the interior territory you inhabit is shared by every human being who has ever lived, is, in Jung's understanding, the foundation of genuine belonging, the specific antidote to the specific loneliness of someone who believes themselves to be isolated, not only socially but cosmically. Alone, not just in the room but in the universe. You are not alone in the universe. You are carrying the universe within you. 2. The severed connection. Why modernity makes us strangers. If the collective unconscious is the shared root system that connects every individual human mind to every other, what explains the epidemic of disconnection that characterizes contemporary life? Why, in an age when the technology of connection has never been more advanced, does the experience of genuine belonging feel increasingly rare? The answer requires an honest examination of something that the culture of modernity consistently celebrates as an unambiguous good: individualism. The modern self is organized around a particular ideal, the ideal of the radically autonomous individual, the self that is unique, self-determined, the self that is not defined by the traditions it inherited, or the community it came from, or the universal patterns that connect it to the broader human family. The self that stands apart, distinguishes itself, refuses the generic in favor of the specifically personal. This ideal has genuine value. The capacity for genuine self-determination, for choices that are actually one's own rather than simply the reproduction of inherited patterns, is a genuine psychological achievement. The individuation process that Jung himself described as the central developmental task of human life is, in its deepest sense, a process of genuine individual development. But there is a version of individualism, the specifically modern, specifically technologically amplified version, that has taken the genuine value of authentic self-development and pushed it to a point where it produces its own specific pathology. The pathology of psychological homelessness, when the emphasis on individual uniqueness becomes so that all connection to universal human patterns feels like a threat to individual identity, when the symbols that once linked individual experience to the broader human story are replaced by brand identities and algorithmic content, and the specifically curated presentation of self that social media requires, something essential is lost. Ancient human beings, however difficult their lives in material terms, inhabited a world that was symbolically saturated. The myths they told, the rituals they practiced, the cosmologies they inhabited, all served a specific and irreplaceable psychological function. They connected the individual's experience to a larger pattern. The specific pain of this person's life was not just their own suffering, it was a participation in the universal human drama of suffering and redemption that the mythology described. The specific transition in this person's life from childhood to adulthood, from life to death, from the old self to the new, was not simply a biographical event, but a participation in the sacred patterns of transformation that the culture's symbols made visible. This connection between the individual experience and the universal pattern is what Jung identified as the function of healthy religious and mythological life. not theology in the doctrinal sense, but the living, breathing, experientially real sense of participating in something larger than the individual self, of finding, in the specific texture of one's own life, the echo of the universal human story. Contemporary life has largely dismantled the structures that provided this connection. The ancient rituals have been replaced by consumption. The sacred symbols have been replaced by logos. The shared mythologies that once gave individual lives their place in a larger narrative have been replaced by the privatized, algorithmically curated experience of content that is optimized for engagement but not for meaning. And the result is precisely what we began with: millions of individuals, thoroughly connected to each other in the superficial sense of digital proximity, but deeply disconnected from the symbolic infrastructure that would make that connection meaningful, scrolling through the evidence of other people's lives without the framework that would make any of it genuinely resonant, communicating constantly without genuinely encountering, present without being truly there, psychologically homeless in a world full of houses. 3. Loneliness as signal, not sickness. Here is the reframe that changes everything about how you understand the experience of modern loneliness. Loneliness is not a pathology. It is not a deficiency to be corrected, a symptom to be medicated, a problem to be solved by better social strategies or more optimized connection technologies. It is information. Specifically, it is the soul's way of communicating with the specific urgency of a pain signal from a limb that has been disconnected from the body, that something essential has been severed. Jung was unambiguous about this. He viewed the psychological suffering of his patients not primarily as malfunction but as meaningful communication from the deeper layers of the psyche, not noise to be suppressed but signal to be decoded. And the specific signal of loneliness, the hollow, persistent, socially unresolved ache that characterizes the modern experience, he decoded as the specific communication of a self that has become too exclusively identified with its own individual, isolated, ego-bound perspective, too egocentric, not in the moral sense, not selfishness or narcissism, though those can be expressions of the same underlying dynamic, but in the structural sense, a self organized around the individual ego as the primary and essentially complete unit of existence, a self that has forgotten or never knew that the ego is the surface and not the depth, that the individual mind is the visible tree and not the root system, that the experience of isolation is a symptom of having identified with the branch while forgetting the forest, the late-night hollow feeling, the inexplicable ache that descends when the distractions have stopped and the silence arrives, is not evidence that you need more followers or more friends or more social validation. It is evidence that you have temporarily lost contact with something that no amount of social interaction can substitute for, the felt sense of genuine connection to the depth of human experience that the collective unconscious represents. When that connection is alive, when you are in genuine contact with the universal dimensions of your own experience, even genuine physical solitude is not experienced as loneliness, because you are in the company of something that no room can contain, the accumulated presence of every human being who has ever faced what you are facing, felt what you are feeling, asked what you are asking. You are lonely not because you are alone. You are lonely because you have forgotten that you are never, in the deepest sense, alone. That the specific pain moving through you right now is not an isolated private experience, but a participation in the universal human experience of pain. That the specific question pressing on you is not yours only, but has been asked by every human being who has ever been genuinely alive and awake. That this recognition, genuine, felt, not merely intellectual, does not resolve the loneliness immediately, but it changes its quality. From the specific crushing loneliness of isolation, of being the only one in a situation that no one else understands or shares, to the specific, strangely nourishing solitude of someone who knows they are part of something vast, someone who feels the echo of the human family in their own interior, someone who is alone but not abandoned, solitary but not isolated. 4. Reclaiming the archetypes, finding your place in the story. The most practical dimension of Jung's framework for understanding and addressing modern loneliness is also one of his most distinctive contributions, the concept of the archetypes. Archetypes are the organizing patterns of the collective unconscious, the recurring figures, dynamics, and situations that appear with remarkable consistency across the myths, dreams, art, religion, and literature of every human culture. The hero undertaking the ordeal, the shadow embodying the rejected self, the wise old guide appearing at the threshold of the unknown, the great mother who both nurtures and devours, the trickster who disrupts the established order to create space for transformation. These are not invented characters. They are, in Jung's understanding, structural features of the human psyche, patterns so deeply embedded in our psychological inheritance that they emerge spontaneously in the dreams of people who have never encountered the specific myths that contain them, in the art of cultures that have had no contact with each other, in the psychological crises of individuals who have no knowledge of the traditions that describe the pattern they are living through. And here is their specific relevance to the epidemic of modern loneliness. When you feel lost, when the life you are living feels arbitrary and disconnected and without meaningful reference to anything larger than itself, it is often because you have lost contact with the archetypal dimension of your own experience. You are living a story, but you do not know which story. You are undergoing a transformation, but you do not have the symbolic framework that would allow you to recognize it as a transformation, rather than simply as suffering. The hero's journey, the specific pattern of departure from the known, descent into the ordeal, and return with something of genuine value, is not just a story structure. It is a map of psychological transformation. And when someone in the midst of genuine difficulty, when they have lost their familiar structures, when they are in the dark middle of something they cannot yet see the end of, when they can recognize that they are in the middle of the hero's journey rather than simply in the middle of an inexplicable mess, something changes in their relationship to the experience. They are not lost. They are in the part of the story where the hero is supposed to be lost. They are not failing. They are in the descent that precedes the transformation. They are not alone. Every hero who has ever been genuinely, meaningfully heroic has been exactly here in this dark, this confusion, this specific territory where the familiar has been left behind, and what lies ahead is not yet visible. This is the specific gift of the archetypal dimension. It connects individual experience to the universal pattern. It transforms the purely personal, the specific, isolated, entirely private mess of your own life into a participation in the human drama. A story that has been told before and will be told again. A pattern that belongs not to you alone, but to the entire human family. And that belonging, the felt sense of participation in the universal human story, is the specific, irreplaceable remedy for the specific quality of modern loneliness that no social technology has been able to address. 5. The return to the roots. Practical wisdom for a digital age. The path back to the collective, unconscious. The return to the root system that connects the individual tree to the entire forest is not a retreat from the contemporary world. It is not the abandonment of technology or the romanticization of pre-modern life or the cultivation of some artificially simple existence that the actual complexity of contemporary life does not support. It is a shift in attention, in the quality of engagement with the experience that the contemporary world provides, in the willingness to look for the universal and the particular, the archetypal pattern beneath the personal event, the collective dimension within the individual experience. The collective unconscious speaks its language continuously, through dreams, which Jung considered the primary channel through which the deeper layers of the psyche communicate. The archetypal contents of the shared human inheritance surface nightly, offering images and patterns that the waking ego typically dismisses too quickly to receive. Attending to dreams, not as a specialized practice requiring specific expertise, but as the basic habit of noticing and reflecting on what arises in sleep, is one of the most immediately available pathways back to the deeper layers of the self, through genuine encounters with art, myth, and symbol, not the passive consumption of entertainment, but the genuinely receptive engagement with works that carry genuine depth. The archetypes become accessible. The film that moves you inexplicably, the piece of music that produces something in you that exceeds its technical properties, the story that feels, somehow, like it was written specifically for this moment in your life. These are not coincidences. They are resonances, the specific vibration of the collective unconscious, responding to something in your interior that is ready to receive what the work is carrying, through the willingness to embrace what Jung called the shadow, the rejected, unacknowledged dimensions of the self that were suppressed in the service of maintaining the acceptable social persona. Genuine depth becomes accessible because the shadow is the gateway. The parts of yourself you most want to hide are the parts most deeply connected to the raw, unvarnished, universally human dimensions of your experience. Acknowledging them, not performing them, not indulging them, but genuinely acknowledging their existence is the move that connects the polished surface of the social self to the rich, complicated, entirely human depth beneath it, and through the cultivation of genuine silence, not the silence of passive emptiness, but the active, willing, patient orientation of attention toward the interior, the voice of the deeper self becomes audible. The collective unconscious does not shout. It speaks in the register that becomes available only when the noise of the constantly stimulated, constantly performing, constantly managing social self has quieted enough to allow the deeper frequency through. This is not a dramatic practice. It does not require retreat or ritual, or the wholesale reorganization of daily life. It requires the small, consistent, genuinely committed choice, made again and again, in the ordinary moments of ordinary days, to go deeper rather than wider, to turn toward the interior rather than away from it, to ask, when the loneliness arrives, not how to escape it, but what it is communicating. The loneliness that has become the defining psychological experience of the contemporary age is not a new phenomenon. It is an ancient one, wearing new clothes. The specific forms it takes: the hollow scroll through other people's curated lives, the crowded room that feels empty, the unprecedented connectivity that coexists with the unprecedented disconnection. These are modern, but the underlying experience is as old as the human capacity for self-consciousness. What is new is the scale, and what is new is the specific way the contemporary world has dismantled the symbolic infrastructure, the shared myths, the communal rituals, the living connection to the archetypes that human beings have always used to address it. Jung's gift to this particular moment in human history is not a technique or a therapy. It is a map that shows where the loneliness is coming from, not from the absence of other people, but from the disconnection from the deeper layers of the shared human experience. That makes other people genuinely nourishing, rather than simply numerous, and a map that shows where the genuine remedy lies, not in more connection in the shallow sense, but in the return to the depth from which genuine connection draws its meaning. You are not a solitary accident of biology, navigating an indifferent universe in the company of other solitary accidents. You are a continuation, the current expression of an ancient, unbroken, living chain of human consciousness that stretches back to the first human being who looked at the night sky and felt simultaneously the specific smallness of their individual existence and the specific vastness of what they were. Part of. Every fear you carry has been carried before. Every question you are asking has been asked before. Every darkness you are navigating has been navigated before, and navigated successfully enough that the chain of human consciousness continued, unbroken, to the moment of your particular expression of it. You are not alone. You have never been alone. The entire weight and wisdom and accumulated experience of the human family is present in your depths, waiting for the quality of attention that would make its presence felt. Stop trying to find your way home. You never left. The forest does not begin at the boundary of what you can see. It extends beneath your feet through the invisible, ancient, unbreakable web of the collective unconscious, into the depths of every human being who has ever lived and everyone who will ever live. You are a thread in that web, and the web holds. You are not an isolated individual lost in a vast and indifferent universe. You are a single voice in a chorus that has been singing since the first human being looked up at the stars and knew they were part of something immeasurable. Listen, the chorus has never stopped. It is singing in you right now.